Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this last session of this morning. It's we just had a very interesting conversation on this important institution between the United States and Mexico. It was most enlightening, and I certainly learned a lot whenever we do these events. It is, I think, something that we're all asking. What is the future of the North American Development Bank? It's been an instrument that, from what I could tell this morning, seems to just have taken off, been very successful with as little as they have, and done a great job on the border. For those of us who hail from the border, I come from Ciudad Juárez, El Paso. Congressman Cuellar is also a borderlander. Tony is also a borderlander. So for us borderlanders, this is a very important institution, and we've learned quite a lot today. So thank you for joining us for this conversation to end today's discussion on the NAD Bank and its future. I'm going to introduce Ambassador Tony Garza, and then he will take it from there. Tony Garza is a former U.S. ambassador to Mexico and a current counsel to White & Case LLP in Mexico City. I've actually met Tony in his office. He has one of the best views from Mexico City. When you look out from Tony's office into the city, it looks like a wooded, like a forested area. It doesn't even look like it's a concrete, paved, polluted city. It's really a great view. It is a beautiful city. I love going to Mexico City, but you have the best view. You picked the right office. Ambassador Garza also currently serves as the director to Kansas City Southern as chairman of its subsidiary in Mexico, Kansas City Southern de Mexico. He is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he serves as a trustee of Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. In 2009, Ambassador Garza was awarded the Águila Azteca from Mexico, the highest honor bestowed on non-citizens in recognition of his efforts to strengthen the bonds between Mexico and the United States. Prior to his appointment as ambassador to Mexico, Garza served as the Texas Secretary of State from 1995 to 1997. In 1998, he was elected to the board of the Texas Railroad Commission, where he served as chairman. He earned a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Texas at Austin and his JD from Southern Methodist University School of Law in Dallas. Garza is a member of the State Bar of Texas and the District of Columbia Bar, and he is admitted to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court. It's a pleasure to welcome Ambassador Garza to the halls of the Baker Institute.
Thank you, Tony. All right. I was looking over and making sure they hadn't sent them the long one. Invariably, these things can go on forever and ever, and when they start getting to the Boy Scout merit badges, you say, well, you know, is that really necessary? I actually have the honor today of moderating this panel with Congressman Henry Cuellar. And it really is an honor. Henry and I have known each other for well over 3 decades now, and I think have enjoyed an easy camaraderie, but shared a commitment to the border and really the political process. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that you enjoy politics when you realize that that can also be an end to some very good things. As many of you may know, Henry, I guess, is an 8-term member of Congress now, and he serves on the House Appropriations Committee and a number of very critical subcommittees. He's also been very active in the interparliamentary group between the United States and Mexico. And in fact, we were reminiscing earlier how on one of those sojourns to Mexico while I was the ambassador, he showed up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was able to meet both he and Mike McCall, his Republican counterpart.
And if I can interrupt, I've gone to some countries late at night, and the ambassadors always send staff when it's past 9 o'clock p.m. So here we are past 1 o'clock in the morning, and the only ambassador I've ever had on one of those trips that has been there personally has been Tony Garza.
Oh, I appreciate that.
telling all the members this guy is special.
Well,
So
I
thank you very
appreciate
much.
that. I will say, though, when Henry invited me to join his 7 a.m. meeting, I know he made it, and I said, no, I've got a conflict. The truth is, Henry, I had no conflict. It was just too early.
He did send staff at that time.
Yeah, there I sent staff. But Henry was a big part of the Interparliamentarian. I think has done a wonderful job there. He's also been very involved with the outreach to Panama. And is a leader on the Pro-Trade Caucus, which is a bipartisan caucus. When you get a sense of how well regarded Henry Cuellar is in Congress, I think a particularly good barometer is that you can ask people from both sides of the aisle. And that suggests many things. One is the ability to work both sides of the aisle, but the second is the regard that they have for his integrity, that when there are going to be disagreements, they're honest disagreements, and you're very forthright with them. He's been characterized as the hardest working member of Congress, and I will say also pretty stand up. Here recently when the president, the 45th president of the United States, declared his initiative or his desire to impose 5% tariffs on Mexico if they couldn't meet his, well, he didn't define very clearly, but his desire to reduce the immigration from Central America through Mexico into the United States. Henry was out there very quickly and said this is a dangerous idea, one that he could not support, and then proceeded to articulate and I think led the opposition very effectively. So Henry, thank you. Thank you not only for being with this group today, but for your leadership all these decades on behalf of the border. But more importantly, when we talk trade in Texas, when you're representing that border and you're advocating for trade, you're really representing all of Texas. So thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to open this conversation really with the news of the day. As you know, a little over a week ago, almost like that phenomenon we know in Texas is blue sky lightning, a tweet hit. And the tweet talked about the desire to impose a 5% tariff starting June 10th and increasing 5% every 30 days thereafter until the president's objectives of reducing immigration from Mexico were met. Talk a little bit about, I guess, a couple of things. One is when that tweet came out, what was your response beyond dangerous? Obviously, you were taking into account the economic impacts. Talk a little bit about tariffs, what that might have meant, what that may mean to Texas, because we're still looking at June 10th.
Yes. Well, first of all, before I get started on the topic and answer your question, I have to say something about my dear friend Tony. I've had an opportunity to meet with different ambassadors, and we've had very good ambassadors to the Republic of Mexico. But I have to say, I've really enjoyed Tony, not because of a friend, but because he really knew the subject very well. And that is, he understands that the Rio Grande, or the Rio Bravo, as the Mexicans call the river, does not divide us, but actually unites us together. And that's the premise that Tony took as the ambassador. And it's very important. We met many years ago, but one of the first things that we worked on together was Plan Merida. And the person that President Bush sent up there to work it, because as you remember, Congress was not happy because the two presidents got together and said, we're going to do this, and Congress, as you know, says, hey, what about us? We're involved in this, and we have to appropriate the money. So the person that had to come in and sell this plan was Ambassador Garza, and he did a very good job. And as you know, Congress did approve Plan Merida. So I want to thank you for that first initiative that was so important in our relationship with Mexico. So I thank you so much on that.
Tossing confetti back and
Yeah,
forth.
but
thank you.
Now, what else did you ask me to say? Oh, yes, I'm just kidding. So I do appreciate that. Now, I see a lot of my friends. I see my friends from the Net Bank, Jesse and everybody here, Alex, everybody else. I say hello to the folks at the Net Bank. I see my friends from the IBC also. Certainly I appreciate the IBC effort. We're last night talking about the same issues with business people. So I appreciate both Eddie and Jerry that are present here. I see my niece here, a local attorney here, Marisa Marquez. It's Can't come to Houston without seeing my niece here, and of course Mr. Gonzalez from the Chamber, and I appreciate the Chamber are big supporters. The U.S. Chamber are big supporters, and I have to say this: Chamber has always said this: 40% of all the exports that we send off as a country goes to Latin America, and the U.S. doesn't pay attention to Latin America. When a person sees Mexico as an enemy and Russia as a friend, I know the world has been turned upside down. So talking about the tariffs itself, it was interesting because I'm the new chairman of the U.S.-Mexico Inter-Parliamentary Group. Pelosi put me as the chairman now. And one of the things that we were working on is and I have to lay this, I know we'll talk about the new NAFTA 2.0, but in the process that I was working on trying to get Democrats on board on this issue, what comes up, all of a sudden the tariffs come in and just disrupted what we were trying to do, trying to get Democrats to a yes on that. Every day there's $1.7 billion of trade between the U.S. and Mexico. That's over $1 million every single day. Whether it's El Paso, Tony, or it's Laredo, as you know, little town of Laredo, 260,000. We just became not only the #1 inland port, but we're the #1 port in the whole country. We surpassed L.A. And that's because of the tariffs, in my opinion, part of the tariffs that were put on China. So President Trump's tariffs on China have made Mexico great again, Magna. Yeah. Made Mexico great again. And then, of course, the 5% tariff threat comes in. Immigration is one issue, trade is another issue. The president is trying to put both issues. He's trying to use his vision of what Mexico should be doing, and he's using the threat of a tariff to get Mexico to do two things. It's interesting because if you really think about it, this is what the president is asking Mexico to do. And I think Mexico can do more, and we'll go into that. One, he's saying drugs coming into the U.S. There's a huge drug consumption in the U.S. There's billions of dollars that we send off. So he doesn't talk about the drug consumption, but he says, Mexico, you got to do more to stop people coming in. Two, a lot of people are coming in because we are the shining city on the hill. And people are coming in and asking for asylum, even though I think there is changes that we need to do to the asylum law. So because of those pull factors that we have, the president is now saying we can't do our job at the border, so Mexico, you got to do more and stop people from coming in. And you know this very well. Mexico is actually doing a lot to stopping people. Last time I was in, and Alfonso Romo, the chief of staff for AMLO, they were stopping about 560 people a day, and they were going to raise it up to 800 people a day. You do the multiplication, that's about 250,000 people that Mexico is stopping. Sensitivities in Mexico, they don't talk much about it because the way they feel about transit and people movement of transit on that. But they are stopping 250,000 people a day. They can play Matador if they want to. That is, Ole, come in and stop doing that work. And that would be an additional 250,000 people that will be coming down to the border. So he's looking at an immigration issue and using a trade issue or an issue of, how should I say this? The threat of tariffs on an immigration issue.
Let me ask you this, because you've raised a couple of issues that I think all bear expanding on a bit. One is in the context of the tariffs, and I think you saw this with the negotiation of USMCA. It made very clear how integrated these two markets are. When the discussion about tariffs this last round, immediately people started talking about the impact of U.S. consumers. And that was sort of very focused here in the United States. And then secondarily about the production sharing or the integration of our supply chains and what that might do. And then thirdly, investment decisions. Have you been struck at how these issues or this tariff that were aimed at Mexico, the strongest advocacy has come from Michigan manufacturing and suppliers, Midwestern farmers, or obviously in Texas, if you looked at the impact of these tariffs on crude refiners. Are we now at a place where, in spite of whatever this administration might be saying, that one of the silver linings is how these coalitions have started to really appreciate the North American platform?
Without a doubt. You're right. There are companies in the Midwest and other places that were the first ones to start calling the office.
Yeah.
They were calling the office because, look, our relationship, if you take China and Mexico, they're totally two different economies. First of all, as you know, Mexico has now become the #1 trading partner, surpassed, again, tariffs, surpassed Canada and China as the #1. So now Mexico is our #1 trading partner. But keep in mind, like you mentioned, the supply chains that we have, the integrated economies that we have are very different. If a product comes in from China or Europe, it will have about a 4% American parts in it. If something comes in from Canada, it will have a 24, maybe 25% American parts. But if something comes in from Mexico, it will have 40% American parts.
You're saying that tariff would have cost us U.S. jobs.
Exactly. And I think it was a Perriman report that I think y'all have been working on, 170,000 jobs here in Texas and maybe 400,000 jobs in America because of the more intermediate type of goods or the supply chain that we have with Mexico. And it's not only cars, but there's airplane parts. I mean, there's so many things that are coming in. Ag products, tomorrow we'll be in Laredo with the Texas Farm Bureau. I mean, they're very concerned. I mean, one, they want the trade agreement, and certainly they don't want any tariffs on that because Mexico is not going to sit down and say, Mr. President, go ahead and add your 5, 10, 15, 25%. What are they going to do? They're going to target tariffs on certain goods, and you start this issue. And I bet if they were smart, which they're very sophisticated business people, they probably will target goods in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and no certain why I mentioned those particular states, and they will target those areas. They will be very sophisticated. The Mexicans will be very sophisticated.
Well, hasn't that been their response in the past? I think they call it the carousel, and they're very good at identifying Achilles' heels, right, for lack of a better. And so that's the tariff component. And it's been driven, I think, in large part up to the immigration, particularly the Central American. These numbers are striking, and I don't think anybody would deny that there is a lack of order at the border. Some would call it crisis. I perhaps would stop short of the language that the president needs to base his tariff strategy on, which is enemies and adverse parties, encompassing an extraordinary threat. I quite frankly don't think it rises to that. But there is a real challenge at the border. Tell me what you see in Central America. How dramatically have the underlying factors changed in the last year that have driven these numbers? First, let's talk about those factors a bit, because I know that you watch that region closely.
Well, to answer the question, what's happened in Central America, let me give you the profile of the individuals in 2006 and now, and then that would answer part of the question. In 2006, 90% of all the people coming into the southern border were Mexicanos. Now it's 70%.
Generally single male.
Right, exactly. Mainly
unaccompanied male, I guess.
Right, adults.
Yeah.
So in 2006, 90% of the people coming to the southern border were Mexicanos. Now it's 73% are Central Americans. But among that, you also have people now coming from Africa, Congo, Nepal, China, name the country. And they already figured out that all you have to do is come to the southern border, claim credible fear, asylum, and there is a process that will let you in, and I'll talk about that process. In 2006, 10% of the people coming in were were unaccompanied kids or family units. Now it's 61, 63%. Notice what happened there? Yeah. From 10% to 63%. In 2006, Within hours, 95% of the people that came in will return because they were Mexicans. And we have a different law with Mexicans and Canadians. Now, 97% stay in the U.S. And people talk about detentions, and I'm one of those that I believe in deterrence. Less than 2% of the people that come in are in detention spaces. So, you know, the activists will come in and say, oh, it's this and this, less than 2%. Yeah. So
but Henry,
because of that, in 2014, and I'll say this, did we have a humanitarian crisis in 2014? Yes. Do we have a humanitarian crisis right now? Yes. Do we have a border security crisis, as the president says? No. Right. Again, look at the latest FBI statistics. Rape, murder, assaults on the border crime rate is lower than the national crime rate. The border crime rate, and sorry to use Houston as an example, the border crime rate.
You Chicago.
Okay, Chicago. Well, in Chicago, No. In Chicago this last weekend, I think 70, 80 people got killed in one weekend in Chicago. But they asked me about the border. What's the most dangerous thing about the border? It's when I leave Laredo to go to work in Washington, D.C. I'm not talking about the politics, but the border crime rate in Washington, D.C. per 100,000 is about 3 times higher than the border rate. This is security. Humanitarian crisis, we had it in 2014. We have it now.
Without a doubt.
Central America. So in 2014, K. Ranger, myself, Democrat, Republican, we added $750 million for the Central American countries. The president wanted to knock it down to 0, which I thought it was not the right thing to do. And it's now at 520. So this year we continue adding another $520 million a year to help Central America.
So it sounds like you're saying 2 things, basically. One is in 2006, these single males coming from Mexico were largely driven by the economics, and looking for a job. And our detention capabilities had that in mind. And these much larger numbers, and these are individuals making asylum claims, which gives them a different status. We simply didn't build with families in mind. Is that
absolutely? So what we had in let's say in the early days, there were adults coming in for jobs, and a lot of them would come in, work, and go back. As we provided more security at the border, it was harder, so they said, well, we got to get families, and then I'll say this, drug cartels, criminal organizations, whatever you call them, they do different businesses. The last time I was at the border of Guatemala and Mexico, I was there with some members of Congress and a general named John Kelly. I think you might have heard of him. He was chief of staff for the president. And we were talking about how they control those routes. They control the routes. They now know that if they make $6,000 a head, they use media, social media, they knock on doors and all that, and they know they can make money. Mm-hmm. And if you add $6,000 at least, and there's more, depending on what you want to do, they make a lot of money. So we have now people that have figured out that all you have to do is come to the border and ask for asylum or credible fear. There's her numbers from the immigration courts. I know there's different numbers out there. Out of 100 people that come in and ask for asylum, 88% are going to be rejected. 12% will be accepted. So why the heck are we releasing all those people in? Because we know that 44%, this is all from the immigration courts, 44% of them are not going to show up at the court 2, 3, 4, 5 years later.
So it sounds like you're making an argument for asylum reform.
Yes, but not to the extent that the president wants to do it. We got to be targeted on certain things.
Yeah. Because part of it, and we'll pivot away from this because I'd like to talk about the politics of the last couple of days, then move on to a couple of other topics. But I don't see the conditions in Central America changing fundamentally in any short term. Right. I don't know how you see it, but in Honduras you've had the civil unrest, and it's sort of magnified in Guatemala, collapse of the economy. El Salvador was starting to show some progress, and then that's sort of leveled off. at the same time that this administration has made the decision to cut aid. Where are you on the question of aid? And I think it may take us into some NADBank discussions in a moment, but on the questions of aid and support to Central America.
I'd rather play defense on the 20-yard line than the 1-yard line called the U.S.-Mexico border, where we spend over $18 billion, and that's not including the 14th century solution called the wall on that. If we would use the billions of dollars.
It sounds like you're trying to one-up Congressman Hurd, who said it was a 16th.
No,
you're saying it's the 14th?
Hurd is using my language. So
okay.
I thank my good friend Will Hurd. I said, Will, you're supposed to stick to my language. I said, well, I got to use something else. Will and I are good friends. Republican Democrats were on the same page, and we voted for the DREAM Act a couple days ago on that. So now we got to wait to see what the Senate does on the DREAM Act. So what we do is you got to make some changes, because people have figured out this thing about asylum. If those are the numbers I gave you, but what happens is if you're a Mexican or a Canadian, you're treated one way. Everybody else is treated very differently, not only Central America, but from any other country. You come in, and there's three typical groups that you have. Male adults, female adults, especially criminal records, they'll hold you, then they deport you on that, number one. Number two, if you're unaccompanied kids, you're given a process through Health and Human Services. Non-profits, not for profits, non-profits are involved, and then they put them with families or foster homes. Then it's the third group, which is the family units. Adult, male, female comes in with a child. They get them. Border Patrol will process them. After 3 days, typically, it should be 3 days, 72 hours, they're taken over to the bus station. And at the bus station, they're released. And with that notice to appear at permiso, they can go anywhere in the United States, anywhere. And what's been interesting, ICE has caught up with some of these folks in Houston and other places. They still got their permiso, but they're in a stash house. Why? Because they still owe the bad guys money. Mm-hmm. So these bad guys have this long ways of keeping up with these folks. So I would change, we treat everybody the same way. Why are we treating Mexicans and Canadians one way on that? And they're using this asylum law. Problem is, you got some folks on my side, the Democrats, that they want to have more open borders. I don't believe in that. Then you got Trump and the right-wingers that are coming in, and they're coming in with these extreme positions on immigration. If we were just targeted on the issues at the border, I think we could address this issue.
Yeah, although I think an asylum claim is a legitimate, has a legitimate place in our law.
I agree.
Whether it be Cuba, historically, Venezuela, perhaps more recently, Honduras, today, quite frankly, Guatemala. So I think we do need a place in our law for legitimate asylum.
But what does asylum law cover? What is it? Somebody who's smart out here, everybody's smart, so everybody, what does it cover? Persecution by state on religion and all that. Is gang violence covered? It's not. I mean, I hate to say it, I wish we could do something, but it's not covered. So the asylum law covers certain things on that. And that's why 88% of the cases are denied, because it doesn't cover that. Right. I agree. We need asylum laws. I agree with that. But if you interpret them the way they have to be, then that's one thing. And I would do it this way without changing the law. I would hold people at the border. I would move those judges, and I've added 315 judges in the last 3-4 years. Only a few of them have gone down to the border. All the other judges go somewhere else. Where do they go? They release people, so they send the judges where they release people. And I'm saying no, put the judges at the border, hold them, give them notice, and if 88% are denied, those 88% should be deported. I mean, that's the law. And the other 12% say bienvenidos, or whatever language they speak now, because now they're coming from.
I got to move you through a lightning round, because I know you've got a flight, and we've got about 15 minutes, perhaps 10 more minutes of this, and then about 10 minutes of that, and then we're going to close out. Lightning round. Last few days, you're one of the few people that Republicans, Democrats, and Mexican officials will talk to. They met yesterday. Where will they be at the end of the day today?
Hopefully somewhere closer to where they were yesterday.
Oh, come on, that was too easy.
No, I'll tell you. Look, I've talked to the White House. I've talked to the vice president's folks. I said, what do you guys really want from the Mexicans? Well, they got to show, that they're doing something. Well, what's your indicators? I mean, so it's vague what's coming in. I've talked to the Mexicans, and they're willing to do certain things, and I think they're going to come up with, I don't know if it'll be what they'll call it publicly, but it'll be a 4-pillar point. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that will be enough for them. They met yesterday. I spoke to folks from the White House. I got the readout. I spoke to the Mexican ambassador. I think we were there last night, and she gave me her readout. And they want to get there. The fact that they have attorneys meeting today, it's always good to have attorneys because they're trying to work out something. I think it's good movement.
People
and hopefully
don't
they
normally
can get
say that, but thank you.
As an attorney, it's always good to have an attorney.
All right. All right. Next question in the lightning round. NAFTA, 20 some odd years ago, you were a young state rep. I was along the border. There was fast track legislation implementation submitted, and out of which came NADBank and the Labor Secretariat as kind of accommodations to some of the Democratic interests. How do you see this more current debate flowing out of it, and where do you see a role for the NADBank?
Right. First of all, Democrats, as you know, Pelosi is now the speaker. Trump is not going to run over on this, we're going to get it done, all that. She will move this process when she's ready to move it, when she feels her caucus. Because remember, she is a liberal from San Francisco, but there are some new members that are pretty liberal. Probably more liberal than she is.
How large is the Progressive Caucus? How many members are part of the Progressive Caucus now?
I don't know, 90?
90? So it's a big number.
It's a large number.
Yeah.
Blue Dogs, Conservatives, there's 27 of us. We're the smaller.
But you bark real loud.
Progressive.
But you bark real loud.
Well, I'm at the table, so I guess I'm doing okay. So she's got to deal with this caucus, very diverse. And I can tell you, I mean, Boehner and Ryan did the same thing. And as you recall, I love Boehner. I just saw Boehner, Paul Ryan also. I used to do P90X with him. But there were times they couldn't pass legislation because of the Tea Party. Pelosi's different. She will get it done. She'll make it work. Any legislation's up there, she will get done. When she was speaker, she got it done. This time she'll get it. So she's got to be ready. 4 things that they want real quickly. Democrats want labor reform. I said, hey, you got to thank Mexico because Mexico did a historic change. So Democrats should be celebrating that because they wanted labor. 2, they want enforcement because, as Pelosi said, she voted for the original NAFTA, but then she felt that certain promises were not kept. So she's really focused on enforcement. 3, environmental. NetBank, I got a piece of legislation. Maxine Waters wants to move this. The former chairman didn't like this type of banks. A Republican friend of mine, she says she's going to move it, but I have talked to the trade representative, Pelosi, the Ways and Means. I think we ought to add this reauthorization in the implementing language. So we're looking at 2 routes. Mm-hmm. And the 4th thing is pharmaceuticals. That's not a Mexican or Canadian. These are American companies that wanted protection. So why are we putting this on the Mexicans? When it was an American pharmaceutical industry. So she's going to get to a yes. In fact, I took a group of folks when the Senate was voting on this, and now within 30 days, today there are people from Pelosi's office, Ways and Means, House and Senate are over there. In fact, I just got a text over here. The Senate, I spoke to the Senate president yesterday, they intend to pass their bill get it done. They're looking at June 16th, 17th, which is pretty good. 17th, 18th, I believe. I think they ought to maybe slow down a little bit because they lose their leverage with this president. My thoughts, but it's up to the Mexicans. But they're planning to move it pretty quickly on that.
Well, is the thinking, you think, getting it through the Mexican and the Canadian perhaps a bit later, having it done so it becomes an agreement that has to be taken up as an agreement?
Yeah.
I mean, not opened up to negotiation. And then any additional authorizations or changes to NADBank would be done separately, wouldn't it? Is that the way it would?
Well, we have legislation that will do the reauthorization. I've gotten money in the appropriations, but the millions of dollars I had there is just, they finally took it away. They said, hey, we can't have that money pending there because we need a reauthorization. So we're looking at 2 routes of doing this, and I hope we can do it within, expand the scope, provide a little bit more efficiency for the NADBank. They do a heck of a job.
Yeah.
They do. That's the type of infrastructure we need. The last big infrastructure I saw on the border that impacted us there was the waste treatment plant in Nuevo Laredo, when Nuevo Laredo was dumping 25 million gallons of raw sewage into the Rio Grande. NADBank and other folks came in and took care of it. That's the type of work.
You and a very young governor then inaugurated.
Yeah.
I guess Clements had a little role much earlier on.
Actually, the Mexicans paid 50, the U.S. paid 45. I carried the legislation to, to do the 5% on behalf of the state of Texas.
On the NADBank, because you're absolutely right. They went from, you remember in our early days, jokingly, people referred to it as the Nada Bank because they had done nothing in the first 3 or 4 years. But since then,
I never said that. I said
I
say hacemos más. Oh, well, I'm sorry. That's the IBC.
That's the IBC.
I'm sorry. That's the IBC. I'm sorry. Hacemos mucho.
My point, Henry, is really the bank is an impressive vehicle today. A AA rating, or maybe it's AA plus. I don't know.
No default, right?
Never had a default. They've leveraged their funds. They're asking for an increase in capital. They've done some things that I think are really smart. When you couple that with the aging infrastructure along the border and communities that are expanding and the possibility of doing things perhaps as related to this southern Mexico, I know you have some legislation. What is do you have a broader vision, or do you sense a broader role for the NADBank?
And you're right. I mean, the NADBank does a great job, and I think more people need to know what they do, and this is why we need to reauthorize, add more money, capitalize it, et cetera, et cetera. President Almo is saying that, what he's been telling the administration is that there's an issue in Central America, but they also want to work their southern part of Mexico, Chiapas and all that area. That could be we would put a lot more money into that. That could be something that could be expanded to work on what the president President Almo wants to do. So there is a role for the bank. If we would just think outside the box. And I think the folks sitting here can think outside the box to address some of the current issues that we're looking at. We don't address some of those root issues in the southern part of Mexico and Central America, it's not going to go. We cannot law enforce ourselves out of this issue.
Okay, well, good. Now, we're going to have a couple of questions from the audience, and I want to, again, thank you, and I want to apologize because there was a lot that we could have covered, and I know we stayed a little bit on the topic of the day, but I do think it's important to get a broader understanding of what's going on in immigration. All right. Raul, I was going to say Noel, but Raul. All right.
Congressman, we met with the head of the Senate who's about to run the process on the Mexican side.
Yes.
And he specifically had an idea that he wanted to see how we can make this potentially out of the box happen, right? How do we address the fact that the NADBank actually has the capacity to do non-border projects today? And specifically focus on how do we mobilize remittances through infrastructure associated with financial mobilization for addressing root causes. Where do you see that potentially fitting into how the appropriations process or authorization process has to move forward?
Right, and you're right. I mean, we do have to think outside the box. And talking to the Senate leader, actually, I just talked to him a couple of days ago, day before yesterday, on these issues. We just have to think outside the box because the issues that we're facing right now is not just putting a wall and it's going to solve the issue, because there are some people who think that all you do is put a wall at Border Patrol, at the military, and it's done. It doesn't work that way. We have to go beyond what I call the 1 yard line. And this is where we got to look at entities that we can work on. I'm a big believer in addressing the issues in Central America and Southern Mexico. And we can address that. It was interesting, the concept of remittances. What is it now? over $20 billion.
To Mexico.
Yes, yeah, it's, I mean, a huge amount. If there's some way that could be addressed, not tax them here to build the wall, you know, that's pay for the wall. But I mean, but if we just got to look at innovative ways, because what we're doing right now is not working. And you know the definition of insanity, you know. So we just got to try something different on that. And I think the Mexicans have a lot of good ideas, as we talked about.
Yeah.
The observation I've made talking to these and listening to these gentlemen isn't allocation or, well, first of all, it's what has been allocated, which is paltry. $450 million. It's almost ridiculous. But these gentlemen have been given that paltry amount of money, and then they've been handcuffed and forced to live with a governance system within the organization that makes it almost impossible for them to do what they're mandated to do. Now, why isn't that the Democrats and the Republicans in Texas and the other border states are not lining up in support of what these gentlemen are very capable of doing, giving them more money, and then expanding the mandate? They can't have more money and expansion of mandate without relinquishing the controls that Congress seems to be putting on them.
Okay.
And
I think you get the idea.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, my legislation does that exactly. And we have tried for years, and I'll tell you, the former chairman of the Financial Services, dear friend of mine, just didn't like this type of banks. And he says, Henry, I love you, but it's basically, it's not going to move. So we tried. So then we have a new chairwoman now, and she has told me that she's going to move it. So I'm looking at that route, but I'm also looking at the route of the trying to add it on the implementing language, because if we're able to add it, then it's going to be done. So I'm looking at both routes. I'm looking at capitalization. So everything you're saying is right. Yeah. Now, let me go on foreign aid. Foreign aid is an interesting process. Most people think that if you get rid of foreign aid, you will get rid of the deficit. But as you know, foreign aid is less than 1% of the whole federal budget. Trying to add money, there are 5 countries that are part of what I call the $1 billion club. Israel gets $3.5 billion a year. Then you got Egypt, Pakistan, I think is, you know, we're trying to reduce that. Jordan is now part of the $1 billion club, and he does a great job at lobbying members of Congress. I can go into that details at a later time how the king does it. And then Afghanistan. Iraq used to be there, not there. Mexico, before we did Plan Merida, was getting $33 million. Mm-hmm. Central America was getting $10 million or whatever. We started the Central America plan at $750 million. But as members of Congress, we got to deal with a president that wants to cut it down to 0. So we ended up at $520 million. Problem was that last year there was $800 million have been appropriated, we're ready to go, but the State Department was moving very slowly. So I had to put a spend plan in the appropriation saying, you got to develop a plan and spend this money quickly. They never give cash. I mean, so I don't want anybody, because people think about Latin America, first thing they think about, corruption. Don't you think there's corruption in some of the other countries that I just mentioned? Why is it only Latin America? And the issue, finally, the issue of governance, I mean, what do you want us to do? Topple down those governments? I mean, you know, we got to work with those governments as much as we can, but the resources are going to NGOs and certain areas so we can help the folks there. I do have to say that, you know, even, you know, since I was involved in this appropriations to Central America, I haven't been very happy with the results because we still got a lot of people coming in. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Let me, because I've got to wind this down. I want to, again, thank you. But to your point, and I do want to say a couple of words. Misunderstood development banks have an uphill battle in Congress.
They do. Most banks do.
Because there's the tendency to think of anything around NADBank, as you said, as foreign aid.
Or the Import-Export Bank.
Or the
Remember, we had a problem
or the
with
OPIC.
that.
But the strongest case that NADBank can make is the one that I think Alex was making earlier, and people talking about, you know, the credit rating, the effectiveness of the deployment of capital, the leverage, the way you've done it. Alex, you and your predecessor, Jeronimo, who I worked with closely for a number of years in Mexico, the strongest case that can be made is your performance.
Yes.
So thank you and your entire team for the great work that you're doing at NADBank. We very much appreciate it. And also, Henry, for your great work in Congress. Keep it up. You really are the one individual that, by virtue of the district that you represent, impacts the entire state and the lives and quality of lives of Texans all across the state. So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now we got to get him to the airport. Ándale.